Hello, everyone, and welcome to CyFy 2022. This is a special session on future-proofing cities and making them smart cities for future of climate change. So my name is Janet Salem. I'm the co-founder of a startup called FootprintLab in Australia. So what FootprintLab is doing is providing carbon footprint data, material footprint data in a format that can be integrated into fintech data. So that in the future, including in our cities of the future, every time you make a transaction, you should be able to know the carbon footprint of that transaction and track it down the supply chain. But before starting this startup earlier this year, I spent 17 years with the United Nations working on environment programs and sustainable urban development. So this topic of future-proofing cities is very, very close to my heart. And I'm joined here with Ambika. Ambika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Janet. And thank you to ORF for inviting me to be here for the CyFy 2022. I'm Ambika Vishwanath. I'm the co-founder and director of Kubernein initiative, and I'm a water security specialist, and I work in the space of water, climate, gender in the urban space, but also in regional and foreign and security policy. And we have been looking at the future trajectory of cities in India and South Asia largely, but mostly in India, and how we're changing, how the cities are changing, how people's relationship with the cities are changing. So looking at the carbon footprint of that is really important. And I'm already thinking of ways in which we could bring that data into how people in urban India can interact with that data to make their lives better for themselves and then for their future generations. Because I think one of the questions that arise, and I'm going to come back to see if you have any thoughts on this, is what can we do? I mean, we think about climate change as it's such a big topic, and it's a very scary topic, but as an everyday citizen in growing cities, and India is going to have some of the largest cities in the world by 2030, what can the average citizen really do? And I think having that data as part of their knowledge will be really helpful in how they change then their livelihood patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So between us, what I'd love is if we could share, what's our future vision of what are the problems that we're concerned about, and also what are some of those solutions. So let's first dig into the problems. So from your perspective, I'd love to hear where do you think we're heading if we do nothing? What are the specific problems that you're seeing on the horizon?
So if we do nothing, then my outlook is really bleak, and I'm one of those people that's rather optimistic, and I try to remain optimistic despite having worked in the space of water and conflict and foreign and security policy for almost 20 years now. But if we do nothing, I mean, I see cities in India, and that's pretty reflective of this region, but we're likely to see that in Europe and in Australia and in other parts of the world. And I know Australia, for example, Melbourne is having unprecedented monsoon rain right now. And that's something we know really well in many parts of India. But we're going to see cities that are not livable anymore in terms of pollution, in terms of water, the lack of water security, poor water quality. Our green spaces are being consumed by construction. We're not thinking of our housing in a sustainable fashion. So all of that's going to come together and make our cities not very livable. And so then where do we go from there? Do we move further inland because of sea level rise? Do we move higher up the mountains? But then you have the issue of glacial melt, and then you have a whole host of other issues that come with that. So there's nowhere to go in that sense. And so we need to work to make our cities more livable for ourselves, for as humans, for the animals, for the ecosystem, and really for the planet also. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying not to be so bleak, but I feel like there are solutions that we can implement. And I really like this idea of data as part of that solution process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can dwell on the problems for a little while, because that's why you and I are so excited about working in this space, because we love solutions to problems. So I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. It's that cities are so dependent on their hinterland, i.e., land, water, energy, food that comes from very, very far away. And so we know that what is on the horizon with climate collapse, and the way that we are undermining biodiversity, for instance, we know, and MIT has also predicted that by 2030, supply chains will start to be very unstable. So right now, where it's possible to import all these resources, food, water, energy, in the future, that's not going to be as secure. And so cities are going to be left there wondering, how do I feed,
Mm,
fuel, and provide products for all of my residents in the city? So that's one problem that I worry about, how cities will do that in the future. The second thing is that cities are on the front lines of climate change. You've pointed to a lot of the problems of climate change that are on the horizon already. So impacts of flooding or other types of extreme weather like heat are huge problems. And cities are also on the front lines of the fight against waste. So a lot of cities are very resource hungry. We're pulling in a lot of materials to consume, but we're not really great at circulating them around. So we then have huge liability in terms of waste management, litter, and other types of pollution. So these are really big problems that we see. But as you said, a lot of cities are yet to be built. So there is a lot of potential for the investment that is coming into urbanization to correct some of these issues and find those solutions and invest in those. So let's maybe go into the more positive side of this discussion of solutions. So maybe you could name a few of your top solutions for future-proofing our cities.
Well, before I get into that, I just want to add also that cities are the front line of migration and people. We're seeing that in India and in other parts of South, and we're seeing that all over the world, right? As countries face all sorts of problems when it comes to right now, whether it's food or energy security, climate issues, lack of jobs, agricultural downfall. You're going to see more and more people move into cities, and the estimates, which I feel like are very underplayed in many ways because we just don't have that information and that data. By 2030, we're going to see another 40% of India's population moving into its cities. It's about the same for the larger South Asian region, and in many parts of the developing world. And so while that poses a whole other kind of obstacle and a challenge, I would say that's part of the solution as well, right? Because how do we use people in that sense as part of the solution? How can we ensure that people are more educated, more aware? And I don't just mean education in a very formal sense, but education in terms of knowledge and awareness as to the kind of impact that they have on the planet where they live, and the impact that where they live has on them, right? But also, how do we make them more aware that change is possible? And then how do we, and you brought up this point about financing, and I think how do we finance and bring in those connections about innovation that is coming out of cities, and sort of spread it around the world. There are some fantastic things that are being done all over the world and they're not always like the biggest solutions. Some of them are the really small, tiny solutions that really excite me more than anything else, that I feel like need to have a much bigger space and a much wider space. And how do we? So I think in that sense, people for me it's the challenge, but it's also the solution as to how we can go forward. And I'd like to, and it would be great to hear before we get into this more deeper into the solutions, what your thoughts are on that, because Australia in that sense is such a different country from India. I mean, some of the problems I see, especially from the water space, are very similar, but But the way the cities in Australia are growing here, and your population, I mean, there's a huge difference between Indian cities and Australian cities. So what are the thoughts on this, or rather, what is the conversation there that we could perhaps learn from as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that a lot of cities are looking at is how to unlock the creativity and the innovation of the residents, whether they're migrants to the cities or they've always lived in the cities. So how do you tap all the potential that's coming from the residents of these cities? And so that is things like making public space flexible and available, particularly for, let's say, startups or community centers, for groups that need a little bit of space for their solution. And really supporting any kind of collaborative activity, engaging citizens. I've seen some really good examples about engaging citizens in monitoring city, for example, cameras and IoT tracking to find potholes or litter. That kind of citizen science can really get engaged. So unlocking this sort of creativity in cities is something that I think is a really top priority in a lot of cities so they can move forward. Yeah, huge topic. So maybe we can now talk about really how do you climate proof a city, and what are some of the big innovations, especially when we're looking at that interface between technology, society, and security. Climate change is really at the front. For me, one of the most important things is this sort of tracking. So making sure that data is in place. So if, in my vision, anyone can link their consumption patterns back down a supply chain so that even people in cities can be empowered to know where their purchases are coming from, where their food and services are coming from in their hinterland, and make more informed choices. And then you can really have cities become a force for good from their consumption patterns. But that data doesn't just rest with transaction data. I think there's a huge need for much more use of IoT and sensors to help optimize things that are very expensive, like waste management and cleanliness, biodiversity, and infrastructure management, water, all that sort of thing. So for me, it starts, the first future-proofing technology is information systems and tracking. How about you?
Yes, I mean, I would agree. I might not think of it as the first step, but that's only because tech and emerging technology is not necessarily my first go-to solution. It would be, increasing awareness, understanding, especially if, coming from a context like India. I think our awareness of our relationship with our surroundings, how, civic sense really is something that needs to be broadened in that sense. But that awareness comes from information and data. So it perfectly aligns with what you're saying in that sense. And I guess one of the first steps for me is because I've worked in the space of water for so long, is how do we safeguard our resources, right? You need water for life. You need also water for your food security. You need it for your health security, which we found, I think a lot of people realized the importance of water during the pandemic, and how, washing your hands for 20 seconds was really one of the most important ways that you could safeguard yourself. But I wrote about this several times. I was like, if there is no water, you're not going to be able to wash your hands for 20 seconds. Not everybody has the luxury of 24/7 running water to be able to do something like that. And then you need, so it's food security, it's health security, it's a sanitation issue, it's basic life. So in that sense, if we can safeguard our resources, the way we use them in our cities, and I think that point about circularity then comes in play. We're not very good, and we, I mean, globally, not very good at bringing the circularity concepts and ideas into our water management in cities. it's starting a little bit, and I think there are places that we could learn from, but it's not so. So how do we safeguard that? And then using IoT sensors, and any form of emerging technology that helps us in that, I think is a really is the way to begin.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we could, I mean, I'd be the happiest person if our water was the forefront of every single discussion going forward. I think we'd really be able to, I don't know about climate proof, but definitely work and move in that direction.
Yeah, water, not just today, but where that water will be in the future.
Yes.
And I know that there are instances of cities being built in areas where that question hasn't really been thought of. Where will the water come from in 20, 30, 50 years from now? Are we sure the water is going to be there? But you touched on circular economy, and that circular cities for me are then, when it comes to the physical side of things, that is the number one area where we need better technologies. And there's a huge opportunity. So many startups and solutions on the market already. Some of my favorites are vertical agriculture. So instead of depending on food that may in the future become unreliable in terms of supply, there are beautiful startups right now working on bringing urban agriculture to life in a profitable way, whether that's vertical farming or producing protein in new and innovative ways. Those are really technologies I would keep an eye on. And secondly would be water. Whatever water falls within a city should stay there as long as possible and circulate. You just have to look at Singapore. They've been doing this for a long time. This is a city without a country hinterland. Anything it brings in is an import across a state border. So that is a very insecure situation to be in. So no wonder they already circulate their water. It's very, very precious. But then there's also all that waste that's floating around cities. Instead of being such a liability, something that needs to be recycled or shipped to another country or landfilled, it should be seen as a resource. So if we can't manage it as a resource, we need to shift towards a reusable version or a biodegradable version of that product. So really looking at circular economy. And we've seen a really great rise in startups that enable share economy. So again, we're unlocking that latent resource of what's sitting in people's drawers or in their closets. Think baby clothes, think gadgets, fashion, that they no longer need. And getting that peer-to-peer sharing, whether it's through Facebook Marketplace or eBay or whatever other solution, so that once a resource enters that city, it can bounce between the residents until it's really no longer usable. So that would be my the second technology, would be anything that enables circular economy.
Yeah. I want to add there also is that it's not about using tech. And I think this is where, I mean, I used to come from this idea, right, that technology was only used to create something that is making your life or circular economy better, or in that sense, something that's a product. But as you rightly pointed out, technology also becomes a medium for sharing, for information sharing, for a marketplace. I mean, look at us right now, right? Technology is enabling us to share ideas, and those we can take forward then. So I think it's how we use the technology that exists in innovative ways then also becomes very interesting, and how we can do that going forward. And you mentioned Singapore, and I wanted to add an example there of Taipei, and what Taipei in Taiwan is doing with their water insecurity issues that they're trying to now solve and have been trying to solve for several years. And I think they're on a very interesting positive track of the way they're using sensors, the way they're using more circularity in their water systems, cleaning up the quality of the water and various other ways. And so I think that's an interesting example, because for a lot of places, Singapore becomes a very lofty goal that we can't necessarily always abide to. So then I fall back on a city like Taipei that's very crowded, and it's got a whole host of challenges that other developing cities are also facing. And so maybe it's a slightly easier goal to aspire towards in that sense.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost at time, but you did touch on one topic that is that it doesn't always have to be technology. And I remember Wired magazine said that bike lanes are more disruptive technologies than your blockchain. So I do want the last thing, what is that shared space and designing those cities so that you can have that 15-minute city, that things are within reach, and that public space is something that is a shared resource. That's a city I'd want to live in the future. I see we're at time. So Ambika, I want to thank you very much for sharing.
Janet. This has been great. Yes.
Not only problems, but I think between us, we see solutions all the time that are not scaled up, not in place. And, it's our sincere wish that these are adopted at scale. So thank you very much for joining me in this conversation.